Okay, so if you haven't watched the previous videos, please go and watch those. They're part of the playlist. There's an introduction into the app, there's an introduction into the CISA category, and then there's already 4 parts where we actually look at a fund. And here I'm just going to select the fund again, the balanced fund, and I'm going to go straight to where we left off. There's a lot of information here. All of this is in parts 1 to 4, so just go and watch those videos. Watch them at a high speed, change the speed of the playback, and we've covered all of this. So there's a lot of information in there for you to go and get up to speed with everything that's available here. So in the last one we covered the regression metrics, and now we'll move on to the risk return metrics. Again, you can choose the period here all the way. It's got data here for the last 240 months or 20 years, but you can look at a different period, the last 60 months. And here we've got a whole bunch of return metrics, risk metrics, and risk-adjusted return metrics. I'm not going to go into each one of these in terms of what they are. You can just look through them and look them up if you don't know what they are, like the risk-free rate. In this case, I use the Steffi call rate, the consumer price index. A real return would be the fund's return above the risk-free rate. Benchmark return, the R squared, the fund's regression to the benchmark. Here's the annualized return, the cumulative return, residual risk, appraisal ratio. So there's many of these sort of risk-adjusted return ratios, Traynor, M2, Jensen's Alpha. So many of these sort of metrics, I'll actually go into these maybe in a little bit more detail when we look at the innate ranking system, where I've created a ranking system with 30 different metrics, return metrics, risk metrics, and risk-adjusted return metrics. But there's a lot of information here if you wanted to know the Sharpe ratio. So this is the Sharpe ratio of the fund over the past 60 months to January 2023. Okay, you could choose a different period here. So a whole bunch of risk and return metrics here. The mega ratio, drawdown, Kalmar, the pain ratio, pain index, etc. Right, the next section is nominal monthly log returns. And why do we use log returns? Because typically returns have a skew, or the distribution is positively skewed. And that's because returns can be very high, but they can't really be, for example, below 100%. You can't lose more than your money invested. And therefore, if we take the log returns, you find better behavior of having more symmetrical sort of returns. Doesn't apply everywhere, but for a lot of these funds you'll find that it does apply. So what I do here is just look at, for example, what is the mean or the average monthly return and the annualized return in parentheses there. What about the standard deviation, the monthly standard deviation and the annualized standard deviation, also known as volatility, the skewness and excess kurtosis. So again, if you wanted to understand whether these returns, these nominal returns, log returns, have a normal distribution, you'd look at the skewness and kurtosis. In fact, there's a test, the Jacques-Barra statistic, to test whether the returns come from a normal distribution. In other words, are normally distributed. So that would mean the returns are log normally distributed and the log returns are normally distributed. And you can see here there's very little skewness, certainly over 60 months even less. That's updated. You can see it takes a while. It has to go and calculate that. And excess kurtosis of 0 basically. So the omnibus test for normality, it passes that. So then we do a T statistic, and don't look at this if it doesn't pass the normality test, but otherwise you can look at that to see, is the return, that monthly return, under the null hypothesis. We assume that it's equal to 0, or we want to test the null hypothesis that it's equal to 0. And here we're basically showing a low t statistic with a high p-value. In other words, you couldn't reject the null hypothesis that this is close to 0. Why? It's a fairly low number compared to the standard deviation. Okay, also check for serial correlation. Again, not much evidence of serial correlation. And then based on that, we can actually calculate the percentile nominal returns on an annualized basis greater than 1 year. Sorry, they're annualized if the period is greater than 1 year. So the percentile of those nominal returns, in other words, the fifth percentile of the 5% of the worst returns, the fifth percentile was minus 4.64, whereas the 95th percentile was 6.32. Whereas over 10 years, it would be 2.34 versus 15.3. So this is done on a parametric basis. And here we can actually calculate, using that methodology, the probability of capital loss over those periods. Okay, so what's the probability of losing capital over a 10-year period? Very low, 1.1%. I'll also do that on a Monte Carlo basis. So using those historical 240 returns, just do thousands of simulations, and you see that 1.4% of the time, you'd get a 10-year return that was below 0. In other words, capital loss. Similar sort of thing for the active returns. Again, taking the log of the active returns, and to be honest, for active returns, you don't even need to take a log. They're fairly well behaved. They don't tend to have skewness in them anyway. And again, you can choose the benchmark here. So in this case, we're doing it against the category average. The mean, the average active return, annualized in parentheses. The tracking error would be that 1.9%. That would be on a monthly basis. Skewness, kurtosis, test for normality, doesn't fail, and then test the null hypothesis. You wouldn't be able to reject the null hypothesis that the average active return is 0. Test for serial correlation, again, to pass that comfortably. And to finish off, again, the same percentile tables for the active return, which at the bottom here we can calculate both parametric and Monte Carlo again. The probability of underperforming, so of the fund underperforming the benchmark, in this case the category average. So over, for example, a 3-year period, there's a 10 to 12% probability that this fund will underperform the benchmark. So again, don't use these rolling returns to calculate hit rates or consistency rates. Come here and have a look at these. This is based on the monthly returns, either fitting a distribution to that or just running thousands of simulations and calculating the probability of underperformance over a specific period. I think that's pretty much it for the fund information. You may have seen that in a couple of places here, and I didn't cover this in a previous video. You could click through to more information underline. So not all of it has a little disclosure icon, but you can try and click at various points. Yeah, hope you enjoyed it. This is the end of the the end of the videos on covering a specific fund. I'll then move on to other topics covering other aspects of this application, for example, looking at advisors in the next video. Thanks, bye.